One scout said goblins appeared periodically, but now the town lay strangely quiet. The mysterious figure looked up and noticed movement at the ruined wall. He sprang forward in a single fast motion as soldiers drew weapons. Two companions flanked him and shouted to ask what was happening nearby. They had cleared the ruined square and gathered the fallen into silence. The mysterious figure had absorbed goblin souls, and the party paused as one scout reported no new tracks. He noticed movement at the ruined wall and sprang forward while soldiers readied their weapons. The group found a broken fountain spouting water amid corpses and goblins clambering in the basin. A companion gasped at the sight. The bodies felt still warm. They concluded other challengers had passed through before them and resolved to hurry and catch up. They moved across the tiled hall and eyed the toppled chess king. Recruits warned that another team might reach the boss before them and win. They feared the penalty for failing the trial and quickened their pace. A sudden strike launched from above, and steel met cloth at once. The guard braced as a cloaked mysterious figure stepped forward to meet the attack. An unknown youth was flung into a blood-darkened pit and cried out. A voice screamed die, and the hall filled with hot red spray. A hooded figure watched with bright eyes and prepared for the next move. They moved across the tiled hall and quickened their pace to avoid the penalty. Recruits warned another team could beat them to the boss. A sudden strike came from above, and steel clashed with cloth. The guard braced while a cloaked mysterious figure stepped forward to meet the blow. An unknown youth was flung into a blood-darkened pit and cried out. A voice screamed die, and hot red spray stained the floor. A hooded figure watched with bright eyes and readied itself. Goblins then burst from the shadows and lunged. One defender swung hard, and a shockwave blasted outward, knocking attackers aside. They moved across the tiled hall to quicken their pace and avoid the penalty. Recruits warned another team could beat them to the boss. A strike fell from above, and steel clashed with cloth. The guard braced while a cloaked mysterious figure stepped forward to meet it. An unknown youth was flung into a blood-dark pit and cried out. Goblins burst from the shadows and lunged at the defenders. A defender's shockwave knocked many attackers aside. The mysterious figure then leapt and drove a brutal kick into a goblin. He said he was starting to gag at killing goblins and asked if they were finished. A piercing shriek answered, and tension tightened around them. They crossed the tiled hall to quicken their pace and avoid the penalty. Recruits warned another team could reach the boss before them and would interfere. A strike fell from above, and steel met cloth as the guard braced. A cloaked mysterious figure stepped forward into the blade and met the threat. An unknown youth was flung into a blood-dark pit and cried out in panic. Goblins burst from the shadows and lunged at the defenders before being pushed away. A defender's shockwave knocked many aside while the mysterious figure leapt and struck. He muttered he was starting to gag at killing goblins and paused. A piercing shriek answered as he vaulted and descended with red eyes and sneered fools. They crossed the tiled hall to quicken their pace and avoid penalty. Recruits warned another team could reach the boss and interfere. Steel met cloth as a strike fell from above, and the guard braced. A cloaked mysterious figure stepped into the blade and took the hit. Goblins burst from shadows, and defenders pushed them back with force. A red-eyed figure answered with a piercing shriek and cut down monsters. After the clash, the ground lay littered with bodies and broken weapons. Recruits gathered and offered praise to Li Xian while wounds still bled. One man complained he had done all the hunting. Lei Jinhu denied it. They reached the eye-marked boss door, and one ordered it opened. A younger recruit stepped forward and offered to open it at once. His older companion watched from the rear while the recruit approached the eye-marked door and touched a mechanism. The doorway pulsed and the system interface materialized. It declared the conditions satisfied and announced that all members of the challengers' team would enter the Goblin King's spiral tower. The group braced as the gateway readied to admit them. The interface materialized and announced the boss's conditions to the challengers. It declared the boss battle would begin when only one of the two teams remained. A second notice forbade anyone from leaving the current location. The group flinched and braced on the tower platform as alarm fires rose. Below them, a red energy cube descended and sealed the surrounding city. Unknown Youth's features hardened in a tense close-up as he prepared for battle. His older companion watched from the rear with measured calm. The city stayed sealed beneath the red cube as the wind stirred ash and cinders. A young voice cried Li Xian's name and pointed toward approaching figures on the plaza. 3 armored figures walked across cracked stone toward the group on the platform. The hooded man lifted his face and fixed his cyan eyes on them. Unknown Youth's older companion stayed near the rear watching with steady calm. A tired soldier spat a curse and said the ordeal was getting annoying. Everyone tensed as the strangers closed the distance beneath the blood-red sky. The hooded man stepped forward and declared he would go against them himself. 2 companions flanked him, blades and staff reflecting the blood-red sky above. A voice asked Li Heiyan for only an agility buff for the speaker. The speaker directed all remaining enhancements toward Lei Sung-hoon with firm certainty. Li Heiyan remained silent but watched him, her eyes reflecting measured judgment. She acknowledged his strength from sight and warned about Hunter's darker dangers. 3 shadowed figures with red eyes emerged, turning the greater threat toward human hunters than monsters. The hooded man accepted the arrangement and promised to warn if danger approached. Li Heiyan complied and cast a focused agility buff toward him. A blue interface confirmed agility increased by 2 and a duration of 10 minutes. He left backup duties to his companions and acknowledged their readiness. The 3 red-eyed figures remained beyond the gate, drawing the greater threat. The hooded man strode into the clearing while allies held tense positions. Silence thickened as they prepared for the imminent clash. The hooded man had accepted the arrangement and strode into the clearing alone. Li Heiyan had cast an agility buff, and a blue interface confirmed the increase. Allies fell back into tense positions and warned him that the foe approached. Beyond the gate, 3 red-eyed figures waited and formed the greater threat. He reviewed his kills and judged himself better than the average hunter. He counted 30 goblins slain there and trusted his current strength. Then he launched forward in a fast, precise charge toward the unseen enemy. The red-eyed figure accepted the arrangement and entered the clearing alone. Li Heiyan cast an agility buff, and a blue interface confirmed the increase. Allies fell back into tense positions and warned that the foe approached beyond the gate. He reviewed his kills and judged himself better than the average hunter, counting 30 goblins slain. Then he moved, his eyes flaring blue with sudden focus. He launched a fast, precise charge toward the unseen enemy while the recruits readied their weapons. The ground exploded as a force struck the clearing and threw dust outward. A lone figure burst through the blast and sprinted straight toward the group. The leader's face tightened with alarm, and he ordered Li Jinhu to focus his shield with every ounce of power. Li Jinhu staggered but answered, planting his feet and raising his shield into a panicked barrier. Recruits fell into defensive stances around him, while the trainer watched and sweat ran down his temple. The scene held a single desperate hope: the shield had to hold. The clearing had exploded, and a lone figure had barreled toward the group. Li Jinhu shouted and forced his shield open with everything he had. He staggered, planted his feet, and the shield bloomed into a radiant dome. The dome slammed into the ground and threw dust and debris outward. Recruits scrambled behind it while the trainer watched and wiped sweat. A dark-cloaked attacker launched through the air, aiming a spear at the barrier. Li Jinhu held the shield as the attacker dove and struck the dome. The impact cast a long shadow across the barrier, but the shield did not break. The clearing erupted as a lone attacker barreled into the group, and Li Jinhu braced. He forced his shield open, planted his feet, and the barrier bloomed into a radiant dome. The dome slammed down with force, scattering dust and debris across the field. Recruits scrambled for cover while the trainer wiped sweat from his brow. A cloaked assailant dove at the barrier with a spear and struck its surface with full force. The impact cast a long shadow, but the shield held and did not break. The shockwave threw soldiers backward and knocked them off their feet. The attacker tumbled clear, but recovered and surged forward with eyes fixed on the dome. The field convulsed as the cloaked assailant slammed the barrier and then struck again. Lee Jinhu held his stance beneath the dome while shockwaves threw soldiers backward. Recruits spat grit and scrambled for cover as the trainer watched, stunned. A dark figure sliced through the air with blue arcs, scattering debris and sparks. Two nearby survivors froze in alarm. The attacker tumbled, then rose with blood on his lip and red eyes burning. He charged with teeth bared and struck at the shield's edge, testing its strength and glaring at the defenders. Under the shaking dome, Lee Jinhu pressed his attack, while shadowed defenders reeled. Blades flashed and sparks flew as the cloaked assailant met each strike with uncanny timing. Jinhu judged himself the superior technician, yet he found his blows arrested by odd, inward blocks. He felt the opponent redirect force rather than absorb it, forcing him to increase his strength. Muscles strained, attacks grew heavier, and the shadow's eyes flared with blue light. The fight held its brutal tempo as Jinhu recalibrated, testing power against the enemy's unexpected defense. Under the shaking dome, Lee Jinhu pressed his assault, while shadowed defenders reeled around him. Blades flashed as the cloaked opponent met, each strike with uncanny timing and inward parries. Jinhu judged himself the better technician, yet found his force redirected rather than absorbed. He pushed harder, muscles burned as attacks grew heavier, and the shadow's eyes flared blue. The enemy did not merely block, it channeled momentum into a single lethal arc. It descended as a wide blue blade while the attacker yelled, "This is the end." The impact exploded outward, dust and shockwaves slammed the space and silenced the dome. Jinhu staggered back stunned and wordless as the panel emptied into blinding light. The dome shook as Lee Jinhu pressed his assault forward. Blades collided while the cloaked assailant met each strike precisely. Jinhu pushed harder though his strength was redirected rather than stopped. Blue light flared in Lee Jinhu's eye as he steadied for the next swing. His opponent's expression shifted to alarm and a red eye narrowed in reply. The cloaked assailant recognized the threat and spat that Jinhu could see the blade's path. The revelation froze the moment and left the air taut and shallow. The dome shook as Lee Jinhu pressed his assault forward. Blades had collided and the cloaked assailant met each strike precisely. Jinhu pushed harder though his strength was redirected rather than stopped. Blue light flared in Lee Jinhu's eye as he steadied for the next swing. The cloaked assailant snarled that Jinhu could see the blade's path. A spinning armored orb with a red optic slammed into view and struck. The strike spat dust across the field and blurred his sight. Lee Jinhu swore that his vision had failed. The cloaked assailant surged with blue-lensed speed and closed the gap as Jinhu stumbled and the air grew taut. The dome still shook as Lee Jinhu staggered from the blow. Blood slid from his mouth and he spat curses through clenched teeth. The cloaked assailant stood close and watched every falter and feint. A blue flare in Jinhu's eye dimmed as his vision clouded with dust. Suddenly, the interface announced completion of a special task with cold detachment. 2 reward notices flickered above the arena, promising extra prizes for the 4th floor. The camera pulled back to reveal 3 figures standing around a sprawled body. Silence fell while embers drifted and blood darkened the flagstones beneath them. The dome still trembled as Lee Jinhu staggered from a heavy blow. Blood slid from his mouth, and he spat curses through clenched teeth. The cloaked assailant stayed close and watched every falter. The interface announced task completion, and reward notices flickered above the arena. The camera pulled back to show 3 figures around a sprawled body. Silence fell as embers drifted, and blood darkened the flagstones beneath them. A woman saw his hands tremble and asked if he was okay. He lied and said he was fine, though his breath came uneven. She suspected he might be in shock after killing someone in the arena. She had thought him strong and cold, but now began to plan. The cloaked figure lingered near Lee Jinhu as the dome still trembled from earlier strikes. Lee Jinhu offered a flat reassurance, while the guard and the unknown woman answered with a brief reply. Silence broke when the goblin leader erupted in a red-eyed scream and lunged at the group. The cloaked assailant moved with a swift arc and drove the blade through flesh and bone. Blood spattered across the flagstones as the beast reeled and collapsed. Lee Jinhu tensed but did not intervene. Embers drifted while the arena floor darkened with blood. The interface announced that the trial's goal, the goblin leader, had been defeated. Blue notification panes listed rewards including a stat increase and the instant acceleration skill. The cloaked assailant walked through blood and left the creature motionless on flagstones. Lee Jinhu remained stiff and said nothing while the arena floor settled. A guard stared in horror and mouthed that the attacker was a monster. The guard then stammered that he would go first and stepped forward. The interface confirmed their transfer to the lobby. The interface had announced the goblin leader's defeat and displayed reward notifications. The cloaked assailant had walked through blood and left a creature motionless on flagstones. Lee Jinhu had remained stiff while a guard mouthed that the attacker was a monster. The interface then confirmed their transfer to the lobby as the arena settled. After the trial, two figures faced each other between the glowing portals. The cloaked assailant spoke first and wished Lee Heian a safe return. Lee Heian hesitated, then offered measured words that eased the awkward silence. A low camera angle revealed bloodied corpses and dark pools on the floor. The arena system announced the goblin leader's defeat and distributed reward notifications across the display. A cloaked assailant had walked over blood and left a creature motionless on the flagstones. Lee Jinhu had stood rigid, while a guard mouthed that the attacker was a monster. Between the glowing portals, the cloaked figure and Lee Heian faced each other briefly. The attacker offered Lee Heian a safe return, and she hesitated before replying. A friend request from Lee Heian appeared on the interface, and Lee Jinhu froze as the camera revealed bloodied corpses on the floor. After the system announced rewards and the camera showed bloodied corpses, the cloaked assailant addressed Lee Jinhu. She held a sword and asked him to find Lee Heian when he returned to Earth. Lee Jinhu stared without answering. A glowing portal opened between the flagstones. The assailant offered Lee Heian a safe return, then stepped into it. Lee Jinhu watched her leave. Blood stained his shoulder and ran across his armor. He touched the wound and decided he had to choose his path alone. The system announced rewards, and the camera showed bloodied corpses. The cloaked assailant addressed Lee Jinhu and asked him to find Lee Heian. She stepped into a glowing portal. Lee Jinhu watched her leave. Blood stained his shoulder and ran across his armor. He touched the wound and decided he must choose his path alone. A red orb rose from his chest as a human soul formed. He murmured that he could absorb a human soul and remembered when he first found out he could do this. Lee Jinhu stood over the bloodied bodies and dark tendrils that stained the floor. A crimson orb rose from his chest as a human soul formed within his grasp. He recalled the day he first learned he could absorb a soul. He had delayed using that power because it crossed a line he could not undo. Now he decided he would cross that line and choose his own path. Red light filled his eyes, and raw energy began to pulse around him. He clenched his hand hard and reached into the growing void below. Lee Jinhu lay above torn bodies and writhing black tendrils as a crimson orb formed at his chest. He remembered the day he first learned he could absorb human souls. He had avoided that power because it crossed an irreversible line for him. Now he chose to cross it and accept all the consequences ahead. He told himself he needed strength but would not use it merely for others. If situations demanded it, then he would use that power without regret. Red light filled his eyes as raw energy pulsed around him now. He clenched his hand and reached into the growing void beneath him. The Tower of Trials offered him a path, and he vowed to seize that chance. Li Jinhu lay amid torn bodies and writhing black tendrils as a crimson orb formed at his chest. He remembered learning he could absorb human souls and how that knowledge had haunted him. He had avoided that power because it crossed an irreversible line for him. Now he chose to use it and accept the consequences ahead. Red light filled his eyes as raw energy pulsed, and he reached into the growing void. He vowed to seize the Tower of Trials and keep progressing floor by floor. Moments later, he entered the lobby of the 5th floor, and the interface activated. Blue system messages declared the system had expanded and announced trial totalization. Lee reacted with surprise when the system stated it would grade challengers' ranks. An interface panel prompted challengers to enter an alias. Li Jinhu paused briefly, then tapped the input and said a name. The system confirmed his alias had been changed from Han Sungden to Hunter. The display immediately loaded the 4th floor trials leaderboard and listed top challengers and their grades. Lee scanned the names, commented on the system's intuitive layout, and asked if he appeared in the rankings. He leaned closer to the screen and froze when the display issued a sudden alert that drew his attention. Li Jinhu stared as the alert filled the screen with his rank and trial data. The display showed him 16th with an A- and detailed time and progress. He exhaled softly and admitted his rank was higher than he expected. Blue panels then declared challengers within the top 50 pioneers eligible for 8th floor benefits. Another notice explained the pioneer status must persist until the 8th floor to earn a halo. Lee blinked and asked the question out loud as his eye reflected the notification. He wondered if the halo was a passive reward or an active combat skill. Li Jinhu stood beneath a blue interface as the screen awaited an alias input. He tapped the display, then typed a new name without hesitation. The system confirmed the change from Han Sung-dun to Hunter in a notification. A leaderboard scrolled showing top pioneers and ranks eligible for 8th floor benefits. Li Jinhu studied the list and asked aloud whether he appeared in those rankings. His eyes widened as the interface flashed his standing, promising possible pioneer rewards. He wondered if the halo would act as a passive honor or an active skill. The interface displayed his precise ranking and performance metrics in a bright blue panel. Li Jinhu read the summary that labeled him 16th Hunter with high results and progress. He breathed and stared as the leaderboard declared the top 50 pioneers eligible for 8th floor benefits. Shadowed silhouettes filled the screen when the system explained those benefits would include a privilege called a halo. Lee's eye tightened on the display. He wondered silently whether the halo acted as passive honor or an active skill. Li Jinhu stepped to the wall and activated a blue interface. He touched the panel, and the system asked him to choose a soul to absorb. A list appeared showing 4 souls possessed and names: Li Xian, Li Jinhu, I Am Sangdian, and Goblin King. The selection panel counted 4 of 15 slots filled. Dark tendrils of energy unfurled around Li as the interface updated. He tensed but did not step back. The system awaited his choice, while soul energy coiled around him. Li Jinhu stood beneath the glowing interface as system text explained stored souls permanently increased stats. He felt the change and thought he had surpassed the limits of a human. Dark soul energy wrapped around his hand and forearm while he remained tense. The system confirmed a purchase as coins fell and his currency was deducted. A notification stated he had purchased a return stone, F+. The interface then displayed the stone's image and explained it allowed him to return to his origin for 3 days while it awaited his next input. Li Jinhu stood beneath the glowing interface as the system explained stored souls increased his stats. Dark soul energy coiled around his hand and forearm while he tested the change. He confirmed a purchase, and the screen deducted coins for a return stone. The interface described the stone's function and its 3-day duration to return him to his origin. He decided to test whether his equipment could transfer with him. He activated the return stone and watched the system notify him he would be returning to Earth. Pink energy spiraled as the mechanism prepared the transfer. Li Jinhu stood beneath the glowing interface as the system confirmed stored souls boosted his stats. Dark soul energy coiled along his hand while he tested the change. He purchased a return stone and watched the screen deduct coins and explain its 3-day duration. He decided to test whether equipment transferred and activated the stone. The system notified him he would return to Earth. Pink energy spiraled around his body as the mechanism prepared the transfer. He watched the light and declared that he was returning to Earth. Li Jinhu activated the return stone, and the interface confirmed his impending transfer. Pink energy coiled around his limbs as the system deducted coins and counted down. A sudden void opened beneath him, and he fell into blinding white light. He kicked and shouted, but the darkness swallowed sound and motion. The portal collapsed, and silence followed while the interface logged his arrival. He gasped awake on soft sheets and saw a modest room bathed in morning light. He realized he had returned to Earth as the return stone's pink glow faded. Li Jinhu woke on narrow sheets and stared at the cracked ceiling above. Morning light slanted through thin curtains and warmed the small room. He lay still and listened to his shallow breathing before a light pain hit his legs and he sat up. Notes on the desk drew his eye, the largest paper read back in block letters. He tried to stand, but his knees buckled and pain flared, so he pulled himself back to a sitting position. On the floor, a sword lay within reach, and its blade caught a strip of light. He stared at the weapon and felt a cold resolve settle behind his fear. Li Jinhu woke on narrow sheets and stared at the cracked ceiling above. Morning light slanted through thin curtains and warmed the small room as he listened to his breathing. Pain flared when he tried to stand, so he sat and stared at a sword. He reached for the blade, felt its cool weight, and a cold resolve settled. A montage of weapons hung in his mind, with captions about returning hunters and shifting markets. The notes on his desk warned that more people returning to Earth would flood supplies. Items would become plentiful and hunter prices might plummet, the highlighted text said. He glanced at his phone, then steadied himself, preparing for what came next. Li Jinhu had steadied himself and reached for his phone. The screen lit with an incoming call he could not ignore. He listened as a terse voice demanded immediate action and pressed him about delays. He flinched, then rose, jaw tightening and breath shallow. The caller's tone grew sharper and brief accusations landed. Jinhu weighed excuses, then discarded them and spoke in short, measured sentences. When the call ended, he checked the sword on his wall and began gathering his things with hurried purpose. Li Jinhu had answered the call and listened as the caller pressed him about delays and failures. He grimaced and examined his phone's ability evaluation, which listed a low E rank. The caller's tone sharpened and laid out blunt demands. Jinhu weighed excuses, then dropped them and negotiated. He offered what he could and accepted the caller's condition. The other man would take the hunter test that day. He ended the call, checked his sword once, and moved to gather his gear with urgent purpose. Li Jinhu finished a quick shower, then caught his breath and wiped his face. He studied his reflection and checked the strap of his sword before dressing. He dressed in layered clothes, shouldered a pack, and moved toward the exit. He paused in the hall and encountered a young woman standing by a door. She greeted him with a single word, and he answered with a short hello. Their exchange lasted only moments, and then he continued on his way. Li Jinhu had just exchanged a brief greeting and left the hall. He stepped into sunlight and paused, his palm reaching up toward the sky. Moments later, he moved toward the street, quickened his pace, and crossed to a nearby building. He vaulted a low barrier and sprinted along the rooftop. Then he launched himself outward, dropping and tumbling onto the adjacent roof. He rolled, pushed himself up, and fixed his gaze. His eyes hardened. He said he would no longer run. He then leapt again, propelling himself farther across the city rooftops. Li Jinhu crossed the city and reached the Hunter Association building without hesitation. He entered the bright corridor and halted beneath the overhead light fixture. Two men stepped forward and faced him with guarded skepticism and thin smiles. One man taunted him and tested his claim that he would not run. Li Jinhu's gaze hardened, and he held to his vow with steady posture. A single voice cut across the hall with a flat hello, drawing all eyes. A suited figure moved forward from the doorway and approached without hurry. Li Jinhu entered the Hunter Association and stopped beneath the corridor light. Two officers stepped forward with guarded smiles and tested his claim he would not run. He kept his posture and answered with steady resolve. A flat voice interrupted and drew every eye. A suited figure moved forward from the doorway without hurry and asked Li to follow him. They walked across the hall and ascended to the building's exterior. The suited figure watched Li from the balcony and spoke plainly. Li met his gaze and replied with quiet determination. Li Jinhu stood beneath the balcony light and held his posture before the suited figure. He touched his palm and spoke plainly about past failure and lacking strength. His confession was short and steady, and it filled the cold air between them. The suited figure considered him and then announced he would choose Li Jinhu. Faces across the hall shifted, stunned by the sudden public declaration. Sweat gleamed on the suited figure's brow as he demanded hurried confirmation. Li's expression hardened, and he answered without wavering, a small sound escaping him. Then the building interface activated and coldly announced that the test would begin. After the interface announced the test, a phoenix erupted from the floor in a column of golden flame. Li Jinhu faced the creature and held his stance as heat and light bathed the hall. Nearby, a suited figure watched from the balcony and smiled, his captioned thoughts suggesting a hunger would awaken and start acting up. The crowd fell silent as the animal roared and the test boundaries locked in. Li braced himself, the room registered every motion. The scene locked into a single decisive instant before the trial proper began. The interface announced the test, and the arena instantly sealed its boundaries. A phoenix erupted from the floor in a column of burning gold. The creature circled the hall and heat filled the air around Li Jinhu. Crowd voices died silently as the suited figure watched from the balcony. Li remained centered beneath the bird while sparks and embers danced around. Blue light flared in his eyes as a new power registered with the hall. The moment tightened into readiness, and the trial proper finally began then.